Okay, imagine holding ultimate power. You call the shots, control everything, seem utterly untouchable. For a lot of people, that sounds like, well, the absolute peak.
Right, the dream, almost.
But what if holding that power wasn't like sitting comfortably on some golden throne, but more like being strapped onto a high-speed treadmill, one you have to keep running on, flat out?
Uh-huh.
Because if you ever stop, or even just try to step off, you're going to fall, and fall hard.
That's a powerful image.
That intense, precarious reality is exactly what we're going to unpack today, drawing on the really insightful sources you've provided for this deep dive.
Yeah, they're fascinating reads.
You've given us a fantastic collection looking at autocrats, tyrants, dictators, the people at the very top of these unchecked power structures, and the almost impossible problem they face when or if they ever consider letting go.
It's the central paradox, isn't it? What happens when the person who has seized and, wields absolute control decides they've had enough? Or maybe, more likely, realizes they just can't keep running forever.
Exactly. What options are genuinely available? And why does almost every single one look like stepping into a minefield? So our mission for this deep dive is to tear into these sources, pull out the absolute key nuggets of knowledge, and truly understand this dangerous high-stakes game of trying to exit the tyrant's seat.
Right.
We'll explore what makes getting on the treadmill so tempting in the first place. Spoiler. It involves eye-watering sums of money.
Big money.
Then the incredible risks of trying to pass power to someone else. And the limited, often equally perilous alternatives like, say, attempting to democratize or fleeing into exile.
And exile itself. It's gotten trickier, hasn't it?
It really has. We'll get into that, so let's dive in.
Okay. You opened with that treadmill metaphor, and it's absolutely central to how the sources describe this life. Being a dictator is like being stuck on a high-speed treadmill.
You must keep running.
Yeah.
Constantly exerting control, power, just to stay upright.
Exactly. The moment you get distracted, show any weakness, or even try to slow down, poof, the moving surface takes your feet right out from under you.
And as the sources point out, falling off this particular treadmill, it's usually, well, permanent.
And crucially, the sources highlight that, unlike a regular treadmill, you can't just step off safely at the end. While staying on can be exhausting, dangerous,
Right.
Voluntarily relinquishing power often proves even more dangerous for the tyrant themselves.
Which really begs the question, doesn't it? If it's this precarious, this potentially deadly just to stay on, why would anyone even want to get on the treadmill in the first place?
Yes. The incentives. And here's where the sources reveal just how immense they truly are.
Okay.
They lay it out pretty starkly. Yes, politicians and democracies can accumulate significant wealth. We see figures like the median wealth for a U.S. senator being $1.76 million in 2018, according to the sources.
Right. Not insignificant.
And former Democratic leaders, well, they can cash in. Speaking engagements, book deals, the sources mention Boris Johnson, former UK Prime Minister, getting nearly £250,000 for a single speech after leaving office.
But in democracies, you have checks and balances. Yeah. You've got investigative journalists digging around, independent police, judges, political opposition, actively looking for any hint of impropriety.
Exactly. It's not a perfect shield against corruption, obviously, but it usually prevents using the entire state apparatus just for personal enrichment on, like, an industrial scale.
Right.
And that's the key contrast the sources draw. Autocracies, they argue, function as enrichment machines. It's essentially a Wild West scenario. Rules might exist on paper, but
they're ignored.
Yeah.
Or just applied when it suits.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Applied selectively based on loyalty or the tyrant's whim.
And the opportunities for siphoning off public money are just staggering.
Yeah. Need a new airport for the capital? Great, the contract goes straight to your daughter-in-law.
Oh, convenient.
A foreign firm having tax issues. Simple. They pay you a hefty fee, problem solved, ordered millions in ammunition. Somehow a chunk gets lost in transit right after a big deposit shows up in your secret foreign account.
Right. And state companies.
Privatized. Sell them off to your buddies for maybe 10% of their actual value.
It's a system built for extraction. Everyone in the inner circle gets rich, sure, but the person at the very top.
The sources state they can get rich beyond belief.
And the case study of Turkmenistan under its former dictator Saparmurat Niyazov really hammers this home. One of the most isolated, secretive countries.
Absolutely. And in 1998, the sources tell us over 40% of the population was living in extreme poverty. Less than $2.15 a day.
Just think about that. Yet Turkmenistan itself sits on immense wealth, fourth largest gas reserves in the world, oil, minerals.
The country wasn't poor, the people were, because the wealth was being, well, vacuumed up to the very top.
And Nyazov was the ultimate vacuum cleaner. He cultivated this utterly bizarre cult of personality, banned smoking after he quit.
After heart surgery, yeah. Banned men listening to car radios.
Seriously, car radios.
Yep. He literally renamed the months and days of the week, many after himself or his mother, styled himself Turkmenbashi, father of the nation. And then there's the Runama, the book he wrote, this mix of autobiography, poetry, weird spiritual guidance, treated like a sacred text.
Kids had to memorize it.
Yeah.
Civil servants had weekly study sessions.
Mandatory study sessions. Even Nyazov himself apparently mused that maybe some people called it a personality cult. The sources are clear. It was an extreme personality cult.
And while he was renaming months and banning radios, he was stealing on an unbelievable scale.
Oh, yeah. The sources detail a 2001 gas deal with Ukraine, projected to bring in $1.7 billion the next year.
Okay.
A later investigation found much of that money just bypassed state coffers entirely, flowed straight into foreign bank accounts Nyazov controlled.
So even if he only skimmed, say, only 10% off the top.
That's over $170 million from just one deal in 1 year.
Incredible.
An NGO investigation went even further. They concluded a significant portion of revenue never finds its way into state coffers, their estimate.
What was it?
A staggering 75% of the state's total spending appeared to be conducted off budget. No public oversight at all.
75% off budget. I mean, think about the scale of that opportunity. It makes perfect sense why dictators often end up being some of the wealthiest people on earth.
It's an enormous incentive to get on that treadmill.
It certainly is a powerful draw. But as we said, the treadmill demands constant running. And eventually, whether it's age, health, or just realizing the pace is unsustainable, some tyrants do think about stepping down.
And this is where it gets incredibly fraught with danger. The sources lay out the fundamental problem. By definition, tyrants have broken laws, crushed opponents, stolen, tortured, killed.
They have a long list of enemies.
A very long list. If they step down, suddenly they're vulnerable. They desperately need protection after they leave office.
Right, so they need someone to protect them.
Which leads to this critical dilemma. How do you find someone powerful and capable enough to give you ironclad protection when that very same person, because they are powerful and capable, is also in the perfect position to utterly destroy you?
That's the trade-off. It's almost impossible.
It really is. The sources show that successors, once they get their own power base sorted, almost invariably start chipping away at their predecessors' influence, their protection structures.
And the recent case of Kazakhstan and Nursultan Nazarbayev, that's a really stark illustration of this, isn't it? How a planned handover can just go spectacularly wrong.
Absolutely. Nazarbayev was on the treadmill for a very long time, became dictator after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right. Then, in 2019, he announced he was stepping down as president.
But it was clearly an attempt at a controlled transition. He wanted to remain the power behind the throne. He even said, "I am staying with you."
And he kept that Elbacy, father of the nation title, right? Which gave him immunity.
Significant privileges, and crucially, immunity from prosecution. He'd built this huge cult of personality around himself, too. The capital renamed Nursultan.
Nazarbayev Airport, Nazarbayev University, Nazarbayev Avenue. He seemed completely cemented in.
And his strategy for choosing a successor was key. He picked Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, longtime diplomat, spent a lot of time abroad.
Some people called Tokayev furniture, didn't they? Implying he lacked his own power base.
That was the perception. The sources note Nazarbayev initially kept such tight control, Tokayev needed his approval for appointing most key ministers, even his own security chief.
The thinking was, because Tokayev was abroad so much Singapore, China, he wouldn't have the deep local networks to challenge Nazarbayev.
Exactly. The plan seems simple. Nazarbayev steps down formally, but keeps ruling through Tokayev, guaranteeing his own safety and influence.
Then came January 2022.
And this carefully built plan just completely collapsed during those widespread protests. The sources recount the scenes in Almaty, the largest city, protests turning violent.
And the crowds were chanting, "Shalket!" Right, old man go, aimed directly at Nazarbayev.
Directly at him and his lingering control. Seeing that anger, Tokayev seized his moment. January 5th, the day the violence escalated, boom. Nazarbayev was removed as chairman of the Security Council.
Tokayev took that role immediately, then took over the ruling party leadership too.
Yep.
The public holiday celebrating Nazarbayev, canceled. The capital city. Name changed back to Astana.
Wow. Quick work.
And what's really striking is how fast Tokayev moved against Nazarbayev's network, systematically removing his loyalists from key jobs, the head of the KNB intelligence agency, a crucial Nazarbayev guy.
Replaced.
Not just replaced, arrested on charges of treason.
Treason. Okay, so the gloves were off.
Completely. And the final nail in the coffin, as the sources describe it. January 6th, 3,000 Russian paratroopers arrive in Kazakhstan at Tokayev's request.
Oh, Russian backing.
With Moscow's military support, Tokayev's position as the undisputed strongman was solidified. Nazarbayev was left isolated.
This case just powerfully illustrates the point the sources make, doesn't it? Once a tyrant actually steps away from direct power, things like carefully crafted laws, fancy titles, council posts, they mean very little.
Almost nothing. The only thing that matters is the successor's actual power and their willingness to use it. If they're strong enough to chip away at the predecessor, they almost certainly will. And things can just spiral out of control so fast, putting their wealth, freedom, even their life and their families' lives at risk.
It's incredibly precarious.
So if trying a controlled handover is this dangerous, if they often get burned, what other options are there once you're on that treadmill and maybe you can't keep up the pace?
Well, the sources explore the theoretical possibility of just turning the country into a democracy.
Right, democratization. Sounds like a positive step, maybe.
Certainly. And the sources do cite research suggesting that a successful democratization more than doubles the chance of a good outcome for the former leader compared to other transitions.
A good outcome meaning they don't end up in jail or worse.
Pretty much survival, maybe some continued influence, not facing retribution. And there are various models of democracy, of course, parliamentary systems like Germany, the UK's voting system, the US president commander-in-chief model.
Even direct democracy like Switzerland, where people vote on banning factory farming and things like that.
Exactly. But, and it's a huge but, the sources are clear, most tyrants resist this option fiercely.
Why? Because they lose control.
Fundamentally, in a democracy, voters are sovereign. Tyrants aren't interested in dealing with investigative journalism, being constrained by a parliament, or, crucially, giving up those massive opportunities for personal corruption we talked about.
The idea of just being an average president or prime minister, accountable, constrained by laws, it's just not appealing after wielding absolute power.
Not at all. Plus, there's zero guarantee they'd stay in power or, maybe more importantly, avoid accountability from independent judges or MPs digging into their past actions.
Right, the skeletons in the closet.
And the sources indicate that personalist dictators, the ones with the most absolute individual power, face a big risk. Only about a 36% chance of a good outcome, even if democratization does succeed.
36%. Not great odds.
And even if a tyrant did genuinely want to democratize, it's often not just their decision, is it?
Oh, right. The people around them.
Exactly. The elites, the power brokers surrounding the dictator are usually just as opposed, if not more so. Many of them have also broken laws, gotten rich. They fear accountability or losing their privileges too.
And the military.
The military establishment can be a huge roadblock. Worried about losing their own enrichment schemes, facing reforms under a new democratic leader who might not trust the old guard. This collective resistance can basically force the tyrant to keep running on the treadmill, even if they secretly wish they could stop.
Which is why, when dictatorships do collapse and democracy emerges, it's often not planned. It happens by mistake, as one source puts it.
Power is usually taken from the tyrant, not voluntarily given away. Argentina in 1982 is a classic example. Democracy emerging from a tyrant's desperate attempt to stay on the treadmill.
That was Galtieri, right? Facing huge protests.
Tens of thousands on the streets demanding elections now. Unwilling to just step down, he made this massive, reckless gamble, invaded the Falkland Islands.
Convinced a military victory would boost his popularity and save him.
And initially, it kind of worked. Crowds cheered, wave of nationalist support. But his whole plan hinged on this monumental miscalculation, thinking the British wouldn't fight back militarily.
He thought it was absolutely improbable they'd use force.
That's what's reported. But Margaret Thatcher, despite advisors pushing diplomacy, maybe sidelining the Treasury so money wasn't an issue, she decided to fight.
And a massive British fleet sailed within days. Galtieri's miscalculation became horrifyingly clear very quickly.
His forces were defeated. He'd run out of options completely. June 14th, angry crowds, now protesting the defeat, filled the Plaza de Mayo again.
3 days later.
Galtieri was forced to resign. Argentina then began its transition to democracy. Not because he chose it, but because he tried desperately not to leave the treadmill and blundered so badly, power was stripped away.
Okay, so planned handovers are dangerous. Democratization is often not feasible or wanted.
Right.
What's left? Exile.
That's the other main path the sources explore, fleeing abroad.
And it's been pretty common historically, right?
Reasonably so. Studies cited show about 1 in 5 dictators who lost power after World War II ended up fleeing abroad. We've seen notorious figures like Idi Amin go to Saudi Arabia.
Tunisia's Ben Ali also went to Saudi Arabia. Mobutu ended up in Morocco.
Peru's Fujimori fled to Japan. And it wasn't just other autocracies offering sanctuary. Plenty of democracies have hosted deposed dictators, too. France hosted several former African strongmen.
Interesting. But the sources stress that exile isn't usually some attractive planned retirement option.
Rarely. It's almost always the last resort. Chosen because the only alternatives look like death or prison. Dictators don't leave because they're tired. They leave because they're being pushed out, often violently.
About 84% of those who went into exile did so during a crisis. Coup, revolt, civil war.
Yeah.
Because they faced immediate risk.
Exactly. They were at risk of retribution right then and there.
And the downsides of exile are significant. You lose your power, you're just a has-been. Finding a genuinely safe place is tough, especially if you've got a brutal record.
And, as the sources note, if you mess up your exile strategy, you might just be delaying death or prison, not guaranteeing a peaceful retirement. Plus, these decisions are often made in moments of extreme crisis, panic. Not great for rational planning.
So a critical challenge becomes finding a host country that's willing to take you and willing and able to withstand the pressure to hand you over.
Huge pressure from your many enemies. Especially tough for leaders known for war crimes. The Charles Taylor case really highlights this.
The Liberian warlord. He agreed to step down in 2003 on the condition he could live in exile in Nigeria, right?
Explicit condition. Nigeria's president at the time made a public promise. We won't deport him. Taylor had a pretty comfortable life initially, villas, police protection. Even the U.S. president said it was up to Nigeria.
But that didn't last.
No. Despite that initial promise, under massive pressure from human rights groups, democracies worldwide, the Nigerian president who'd protected Taylor changed his mind just 3 years later.
And without that political shield, Taylor was exposed.
Nigeria eventually handed him over. He ended up sentenced to 50 years for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Now serving time in a UK jail. He gambled on exile, and ultimately, it failed him.
So, to avoid that fate, tyrants need a host country that's insulated from popular pressure, international influence.
That's what the sources argue. Non-democratic and powerful countries offer the best chance. Democracies have hosted dictators, sure, but their governments are vulnerable to voter demands.
And most citizens in a democracy probably don't want a known mass murderer living comfortably down the road.
Understandably, even if one democratic leader resists pressure to deport, they might get voted out, the next leader might cave. No long-term stability.
Whereas fellow autocratic regimes, they aren't subject to citizen demands. Policies are more consistent.
Generally, yes, but even then, the host regime needs to be stable and strong enough to resist external pressure. If a tyrant flees to a non-democratic country that later democratizes, like Hissène Habré of Chad who went to Senegal.
He faced justice later, didn't he? Convicted in a Senegalese court.
Exactly, so stability and power matter.
Which makes a place like Saudi Arabia seem, well, ideal from the tyrant's perspective, based on the source's analysis.
Ruled by the same dynasty since 1932, incredibly stable. Powerful oil wealth, military, and crucially, no free speech, independent media, civil society to generate public pressure for extradition, hard for outsiders to apply pressure, and they have a track record of hosting.
Okay. But why would a country agree to host someone like that? What's in it for them?
The sources list several reasons, mostly rooted in self-interest. Maybe the exile autocrat has useful connections the host can exploit.
Or maybe they hope the tyrant stages a comeback and owes them a favor.
Right. Keep them on ice, just in case. The sources mention keeping a Taliban office in Qatar for years as an example of maintaining leverage.
Could also be about creating a distraction for enemies. An exiled bogeyman keeps opponents busy.
That's another possibility. Or hosting can be a way to signal loyalty to other current authoritarian regimes you work with. Show them you won't abandon allies if things go wrong.
Like the opposite of how Afghan translators felt after the U.S. withdrawal.
That contrast is mentioned, yes, loyalty signaling. And finally, there's the motivation to avoid bloodshed.
The golden parachute.
Exactly. When a dictator is cornered, facing mass protests, defections, they might lash out violently. Offering safe passage out can prevent massacres. The story of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in the Philippines is a prime example.
Right. Early 1986, massive people power revolution, military defections. He was cornered.
Desperate. He called U.S. Senator Paul Laxalt, Reagan's confidant, middle of the night, panicked. Laxalt delivered the message from Washington, cut and cut cleanly, the time has come.
Marcos was reportedly so very, very disappointed, but he had no choice left.
2 U.S. helicopters airlifted him and his entourage from near the palace grounds, flown to a U.S. airbase, then via Guam to Hawaii on a U.S. military plane.
And what those planes carried, it's just jaw-dropping, according to that customs record. Marcos, whose official salary was never more than $13,500 a year,
arrived with 23 pages of inventory, listing things like 140 jewel cufflinks, 24 gold bricks, an ivory statue of Jesus with a diamond necklace, 27 million pesos cash.
And that was just a fraction of what he stole, right?
Yeah.
Estimates up to 10 billion US dollars.
According to the Philippine Supreme Court, yes, up to $10 billion.
So for democracies like the U.S. there, the golden parachute is this difficult ethical dilemma.
Huge dilemma. On one hand, offering escape can potentially save lives, prevent a cornered leader causing a bloodbath.
But as the sources point out, in doing so, the U.S. basically helped Marcos escape justice, keep tons of stolen wealth, and had arguably helped keep him in power for years before that.
It's a real conflict. What did Marcos deserve? Surely not a comfy retirement in Hawaii after stealing billions and causing immense suffering.
But then there's the brutal trade-off. If outside powers refuse an exit route, a cornered, paranoid dictator is much more likely to order mass killings to cling on. It's highly probable many more Filipinos would have died without that U.S. airlift.
It's a grim calculation. And adding another layer of difficulty to this whole exile option is the changing global landscape over the last couple of decades.
This is mainly due to international justice, the International Criminal Court.
Primarily the ICC, yeah. Became operational in 2002. The core idea is sound. Accountability for horrific crimes when national courts can't or won't act.
And it's had some successes, like the conviction of Thomas Lubanga for using child soldiers.
That sent a clear warning signal. If even one commander is deterred from forcing a 12-year-old to carry a Kalashnikov, that's progress.
Sure, but the sources explain there's a chilling consequence for dictators thinking about leaving the treadmill.
There is. For leaders who've overseen atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity, the very real threat of the ICC adds a powerful new reason to stay in power as long as physically possible, regardless of the human cost.
So you might avoid being killed by your successor, but you face ending up in prison in The Hague. Or like Charles Taylor, a British jail. That becomes a tangible fear.
A very tangible fear. And the data supports this. A study cited found that leaders who oversaw mass atrocities are now about 6 times less likely to choose exile compared to those who didn't.
6 times less likely. Well,
the dictators themselves are clearly aware. The sources quote, Libya's Gaddafi reacting to Taylor's handover, saying it sets a serious precedent.
And Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, friends with Taylor, reportedly said after seeing Taylor's fate, the only way he'd leave Zimbabwe was in a coffin.
He wasn't going anywhere voluntarily. So while finding secure exile was never truly easy, always the threat of being overthrown, killed, extradited,
Right.
With a more interconnected world, the reach of international justice, it's become significantly harder and less reliable.
Which means, for some tyrants, especially those with the most blood on their hands,
the prospect of exile is now so risky that the sources conclude the only rational choice appears to be staying in power, by any means necessary, until they are literally forced off the treadmill.
And if that means more killing, more torture, more theft along the way, that's the calculation they make?
Sadly, yes.
So, okay, you can technically leave the dictator's treadmill. The options. Try a handover, incredibly dangerous. Try democratization, risky, often not really their choice. Or seek exile, historically common, but way harder and more precarious now.
But the sources just reveal how incredibly high the stakes are for every single option, and how few tyrants are willing or able to successfully take that gamble.
So when faced with the choice, keep running, try to pull the plug, or jump off, the vast majority just keep running for as long as they possibly can.
That seems to be the default.
But even that choice comes with a final, brutal twist, the sources add. While they're running nonstop, constantly pushing, the treadmill itself isn't the only threat.
No. Simultaneously, they have to constantly watch their backs, because the sources make it chillingly clear. The people closest to them, their most trusted allies.
They usually pose the greatest danger of all.
It's incredibly bleak.
So what does this deep dive into your sources ultimately reveal? It really pulls back the curtain on the brutal, complex reality behind the headlines we see about autocratic regimes, leadership transitions.
Yeah.
It shows us this picture of the dictator who was ultimately trapped by the very power they craved and the system they built to get it.
Perhaps the deepest prison for a dictator isn't actually a jail cell or a life in exile, but that perpetual, paranoid fear. The fear of the people closest to them. A fear they can never truly escape as long as they cling desperately to that treadmill.
Something to think about. What do you think about that? Thank you so much for providing those sources and letting us